The thunder of hooves and gunfire shattered the quiet of the Wyoming afternoon, as Delilah Kincaid pressed herself against the stagecoach seat, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. This wasn't how her journey west was supposed to begin, but fate had other plans on this dusty trail in 1875. "Get down, miss," the elderly man across from her shouted as a bullet splintered the wooden frame inches from her head. Delilah ducked, clutching her valise to her chest. The stagecoach lurched violently as the driver whipped the horses into a desperate gallop. She could hear men shouting outside, rough, angry voices demanding they stop. Bandits, the very thing she'd been warned about before leaving Boston. Your money or your lives. A gruff voice bellowed over the thundering hooves. Through the small window, Delilah caught glimpses of 3 masked riders closing in on either side of the coach. The guard atop the coach fired his shotgun, but his aim was compromised by the bouncing vehicle. One of the bandits fell back, clutching his shoulder, but the others pressed forward with renewed determination. Delilah's fellow passengers, the elderly man, a young businessman, and a traveling salesman, looked as terrified as she felt. None of them had expected their journey to Fort Laramie would involve outrunning desperados. "They're gaining," the businessman cried, peering cautiously out the window. The stagecoach swerved sharply, nearly toppling as it rounded a bend in the trail. Delilah braced herself against the seat, sending a silent prayer heavenward. 22 years old, and she might never see 23. All because she decided to accept a teaching position in Wyoming territory. Another shot rang out, followed by a pained cry from above. The guard. Delilah's blood ran cold. Without their defender, they were as good as captured. "Ladies and gentlemen," the driver's strained voice called down. "I'm going to try to outrun him, but if I can't," his words were cut short by more gunfire. The coach jerked violently, and Delilah knew one of the horses had been hit. The vehicle began to slow, the inevitable becoming clear with each passing moment. The bandits would catch them. They would take everything. And then, Delilah swallowed hard. She'd heard stories of what happened to women captured by such men. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a new sound joined the chaos, more hoofbeats, from a different direction. Through the window, she caught sight of a lone rider cresting a hill to their right, horse and man silhouetted against the afternoon sun. The rider charged down toward them at breakneck speed. "Another one," the elderly man exclaimed in despair, but something was different about this rider. He wasn't wearing a mask, and instead of joining the bandits, he veered straight for them. As he drew closer, Delilah saw him raise a rifle to his shoulder. 2 shots cracked across the prairie in rapid succession. One bandit clutched his arm and veered away. The second shot found its mark in another robber's leg, sending him tumbling from his horse in a cloud of dust. The remaining outlaw turned to face this new threat, but the mysterious rider was already upon him. A flash of fist connected with jaw, and the bandit went sprawling from his mount. The stagecoach finally ground to a halt as one of the horses collapsed in its traces. The driver slumped forward, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder. "Everyone stay inside," a deep voice commanded as the rider dismounted nearby. Delilah, ignoring the instruction, peered out the window. The man approached cautiously, rifle at the ready as he surveyed the fallen bandits. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a sun-bronzed face partially shadowed by his hat. A deputy's badge glinted on his vest. "Are they dead?" the businessman called out nervously. "No, just wounded," the lawman replied. "They'll live to stand trial." He approached the coach door and pulled it open. "Is everyone all right in here?" His gaze swept over the passengers before settling on Delilah. For a moment, Those steel blue eyes seemed to look right through her, and Delilah felt a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. "We're unharmed," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she expected. "But the driver's been shot." The lawman nodded grimly. "Madam, I'll need your help. Can you climb up top and help me get him down?" Without hesitation, Delilah gathered her skirts and exited the coach. "Of course." The other passengers watched in stunned silence as she followed the lawman to the side of the stagecoach. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 26 or 27. His movements were efficient as he climbed up to check on the driver. "He's alive, but losing blood," he called down. "The guard's in worse shape. I need to get them both to a doctor." Working together, they managed to lower the wounded men to the ground. The driver was conscious enough to mumble thanks, while the guard remained alarmingly still. "Fort Laramie's still 15 miles off," the lawman said, crouching beside the injured men. "I can't take all of you." "What will we do?" the salesman asked, finally emerging from the coach. The lawman glanced at the fallen horse, then at the remaining team. "The coach can't continue, not with a 5-horse team and one injured. I'll take the most severely wounded man and the lady to Fort Laramie. The rest of you can follow with the remaining horses." He turned to Delilah. "Madam, you'll ride with me. The others will be safe enough now that these desperados are dealt with." "I'm perfectly capable of walking," Delilah protested, though the prospect of 15 miles on foot was daunting. "No doubt," he replied with the ghost of a smile. "But we need to move quickly, and I'd rather not leave you out here any longer than necessary." There was something in his tone that brooked no argument. Delilah nodded, suddenly aware of how vulnerable they all were on this empty stretch of trail. While the other passengers unhitched the remaining horses, the lawman secured the wounded guard across his saddle. Then he turned to Delilah, extending his hand. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced, Miss Deputy Sheriff Adam Grayson." "Delilah Kincaid," she replied, taking his calloused hand. "I'm the new schoolteacher for Fort Laramie." Something like recognition flickered in his eyes. "Miss Kincaid, the town's been expecting you." He gestured to his horse. "I'm afraid the ride won't be comfortable, but it's better than the alternative." He helped her mount behind the unconscious guard, then swung up behind her. Delilah found herself sandwiched between the wounded man and Deputy Grayson, acutely aware of his arm reaching around her to hold the reins. "Hold on tight, Miss Kincaid," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "We've got a wounded man to save and daylight to burn." With that, he urged his horse forward, leaving the disabled stagecoach and its remaining passengers behind. Delilah clutched the saddle horn, trying to ignore the solid warmth of the deputy at her back. It wasn't proper to be riding like this with a man she'd just met. But then again, nothing about this day had gone according to propriety. As they galloped across the open prairie, the wind whipping at her bonnet and loosening strands of her auburn hair, Delilah Kincaid had the distinct feeling that her carefully planned new life in Wyoming territory had just taken an unexpected turn. Deputy Grayson kept the horse at a steady gallop, his body sheltering Delilah from the worst of the wind. The wounded guard groaned occasionally, but remained unconscious, a blessing, considering the jarring ride. How much farther? Delilah called over her shoulder after they'd been riding for what felt like hours. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the vast landscape in gold and amber. "About 5 more miles, Adam replied. "My horse is strong, but 3 riders is a heavy load. We'll need to rest him soon." True to his word, Adam slowed the horse to a walk as they approached a small creek bordered by cottonwoods. He dismounted first, then carefully helped Delilah down before attending to the guard. "We'll stop just long enough for the horse to drink," he explained, easing the wounded man to the ground. "I need to check his wounds anyway." Delilah smoothed her rumpled traveling dress and tried to tuck loose strands of hair back into her now askew bun. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Adam nodded, appreciating her composure. Many Eastern women would be in hysterics after such an ordeal. "There's a canteen in my saddlebag. Might help if we can get some water in him." While Adam examined the guard's wounds, Delilah retrieved the canteen and knelt beside them. The guard's face was ashen, his breathing shallow. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. "Bad enough," Adam replied grimly. "Bullet went clean through his shoulder, but he's lost a lot of blood." He glanced up at her. "You're handling this well, Miss Kincaid." Delilah moistened a handkerchief and dabbed at the guard's parched lips. "My father was a doctor in Boston. I assisted him sometimes." She omitted that those experiences were precisely why she'd chosen teaching over nursing. There had been too much death in the Kincaid household. Adam studied her with renewed interest. "Boston's a long way from Wyoming territory." That was rather the point, she admitted, then wondered why she'd shared even that much with this stranger. A faint smile crossed Adam's face. "Running from something or towards something, Miss Kincaid?" "Both, perhaps," she replied carefully. "And what about you, Deputy Grayson? What brought you to Fort Laramie?" He tightened the makeshift bandage around the guard's shoulder. "Born and raised not far from here. My father ran cattle until the war. After he died, I tried ranching for a while but found I had a talent for tracking and a distaste for men who prey on others." His jaw tightened. "Like the Blackwood gang that attacked your coach." "You knew who they were," Adam nodded. "Been chasing them for months. They've robbed half a dozen stagecoaches in the territory. Today they finally made a mistake, hitting a route I was patrolling." He stood, wiping his hands on a cloth. "We should move on. Sun'll be down in an hour and I'd rather reach Fort Laramie before dark." Once again, they mounted up, this time with Adam placing Delilah behind him and securing the guard across the saddle in front. The arrangement was slightly less awkward, though now Delilah had no choice but to hold onto the deputy's waist. "Sorry for the impropriety, Miss Kincaid," he said as they set off again. "I promise I'm not usually in the habit of having strange women wrap their arms around me." Despite everything, Delilah found herself smiling at his attempt at humor. "I suppose we can consider these exceptional circumstances, Deputy." As they continued toward Fort Laramie, Delilah noticed Adam's posture becoming increasingly rigid. When they crested a small hill and the fort came into view in the distance, she realized why. A dark stain was spreading across his shirt just below his ribs on the right side. "Deputy Grayson," she said, alarmed, "you're bleeding." He didn't turn around. "It's nothing." "That's not nothing. Were you shot?" A moment of silence then. "Caught a bullet during the fight." "Didn't realize how bad it was until we were already underway." "Why didn't you say something?" Delilah demanded, concern overriding propriety. "Getting you and Williams to safety seemed more pressing than a flesh wound," he replied, his voice noticeably tighter than before. "Besides, we're almost there." Delilah wanted to argue, but she could see the fort growing larger as they approached, its wooden walls promising safety and medical attention for all three of them. She tightened her grip around Adam's waist, careful to avoid his injury, and felt him sway slightly in the saddle. "Stay awake, Deputy," she urged. "Just a little further." "Yes, madam," he replied with forced lightness. Wouldn't dream of disappointing Fort Laramie's new schoolteacher on her first day. By the time they reached the fort's gates, Adam was barely staying upright. Soldiers rushed out to meet them, alerted by the sentry who'd spotted their approach. "Deputy Grayson," one called. "What happened?" "Stagecoach robbery," Adam managed to say. "Williams is hit bad, and I could use a little help myself." Strong hands helped Delilah dismount, while others carefully lifted the guard from the saddle. Adam tried to dismount on his own but stumbled. 2 soldiers caught him before he hit the ground. "And the lady?" the sergeant asked, eyeing Delilah's disheveled appearance with concern. "Miss Kincaid," Adam said, grimacing as the soldiers supported him. "Your new school teacher. She's unharmed, but the rest of her traveling party is about 10 miles back with a disabled coach." The sergeant nodded briskly. "We'll send men right away. Miss Kincaid, let me escort you to the commander's wife. She'll help you get settled while we tend to the wounded." Delilah hesitated, her eyes on Adam as the soldiers began leading him toward what she assumed was the infirmary. "I'd like to help. As I told Deputy Grayson, my father was a doctor. I have some experience with gunshot wounds." The sergeant looked surprised but nodded. "If you're certain, miss, Dr. Parker can use all the help he can get." Before following him, Delilah caught Adam's gaze. Despite his pain, he managed a small nod of acknowledgement. Something unspoken passing between them, a shared understanding forged in danger. Then he was whisked away toward the infirmary, and Delilah found herself hurrying after them, still clutching her valise and wondering how her first day in Wyoming territory had led her here. The fort's infirmary was a simple but clean building, with several beds arranged along whitewashed walls. Dr. Parker, a middle-aged man with spectacles and a harried expression, was already examining the guard when Delilah entered. "Another gunshot victim," a soldier announced, helping Adam to a vacant bed. The doctor barely looked up. "I only have 2 hands. Get his shirt off and apply pressure to the wound until I can get to him." Delilah set down her valise and moved to Adam's side. "I can help with that." The soldiers gave her curious looks but stepped aside. Adam's face was pale, a sheen of sweat on his brow, but his eyes remained alert as Delilah approached. "Miss Kincaid," he said weakly, "this isn't exactly how I pictured your introduction to Fort Laramie." "Nor I," she admitted, helping him remove his vest and blood-soaked shirt. "But here we are." The bullet wound was on his right side, still bleeding steadily. Delilah took the clean cloths a soldier handed her and pressed them firmly against the wound. Adam hissed in pain but didn't pull away. "The Blackwood gang," he said through clenched teeth. "Did you send men after the ones I shot?" "Already done, Deputy," the sergeant assured him. "Lieutenant Mills took a detachment out as soon as you arrived." Adam nodded, then winced as Delilah applied more pressure. "Sorry," she murmured. "Don't apologize," he replied, meeting her gaze. "You saved William's life today, and possibly mine." "I believe you have that backward, Deputy Grayson. You saved us from those bandits." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Let's call it even then." Dr. Parker finally approached, wiping blood from his hands after stabilizing the guard. He eyed Delilah curiously. "And you are?" "Delilah Kincaid, sir. The new schoolteacher I offered to help." The doctor nodded appreciatively. "Good work with that pressure. Let's have a look at our deputy, shall we?" Delilah stepped back as the doctor examined Adam's wound. She suddenly became aware of her disheveled appearance and the fact that she was standing in a room full of men, having just helped undress one of them. Her mother would be scandalized. "The bullet's still in there," Dr. Parker announced. "I'll need to remove it." "Miss Kincaid, if you truly wish to help, I could use an extra pair of hands. Otherwise, I'm sure Mrs. Collins would be happy to help you get settled." Delilah hesitated only briefly. "I'll stay." Adam's eyes found hers, gratitude and something else, perhaps admiration, evident in his gaze. "Brave schoolteacher," he murmured. "Foolhardy, some would say," she replied with a small smile. "Fortunate for me either way." The next hour passed in a blur of blood, surgical instruments, and tense concentration. Delilah assisted Dr. Parker as he removed the bullet from Adam's side and stitched the wound closed. Adam remained conscious throughout the procedure, his jaw clenched against the pain, occasionally meeting Delilah's gaze as if drawing strength from her presence. By the time they finished, night had fallen. A soldier brought news that the rest of the stagecoach passengers had been rescued and would arrive by morning. The Blackwood gang members had been apprehended and were under guard. "You should rest now, Miss Kincaid," Dr. Parker said kindly. "Mrs. Collins has prepared a room for you in her quarters." Exhaustion suddenly washed over Delilah. The events of the day, the attack, the desperate ride, the surgery all caught up with her at once. She nodded gratefully. "Thank you, doctor. I'll come check on the patients in the morning if that's all right." "Of course. Your assistance was invaluable." Before leaving, Delilah approached Adam's bedside one last time. His eyes were closed, but they fluttered open as she neared. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice rough with pain and fatigue. "You need rest," she replied softly. "And so do I. It's been quite a first day in Wyoming territory." A weak chuckle escaped him. "Not exactly the welcome we had planned for our new schoolteacher." "I don't know," Delilah said thoughtfully. "It was certainly memorable. And I did get to meet Fort Laramie's finest deputy." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure at her words. "I'll be back on my feet in no time, Miss Kincaid. Perhaps then I can show you a proper welcome to the territory, one with fewer bullets." "I'd like that," she replied, surprising herself with her sincerity. "Rest well, Deputy Grayson." "Adam," he corrected gently. "After today I think we're well past formalities." Delilah smiled. "Then rest well, Adam. I'll see you tomorrow." As she followed a soldier's wife to her temporary quarters, Delilah found herself thinking about the deputy's blue eyes and the way they'd softened when he looked at her. It was inappropriate, of course. She'd come to Fort Laramie to teach, not to be distracted by handsome lawmen. Still, as she prepared for bed in the small but comfortable room Mrs. Collins had arranged, Delilah couldn't help but wonder if fate had brought her to this remote outpost for reasons beyond her teaching position. It was a foolish, romantic notion, the kind she'd left behind in Boston along with her old life. And yet, as sleep finally claimed her, it was Adam Grayson's face she saw in her dreams. Morning arrived with the bustle of military routine. Delilah woke to sunshine streaming through her window and the distant sounds of the fort coming to life. After washing and dressing in one of the few undamaged outfits from her valise, she made her way to the infirmary. Dr. Parker greeted her with a tired smile. "Good morning, Miss Kincaid. Both our patients made it through the night. Williams is still unconscious but stable. Deputy Grayson is already demanding to be released." "Why am I not surprised?" Delilah replied, glancing toward Adam's bed. He was propped up against pillows, color somewhat returned to his face, arguing quietly with a man in a marshal's uniform. "Perhaps you can talk some sense into him," the doctor suggested. "He seems to listen to you." Delilah doubted that, but she approached Adam's bedside nonetheless. The conversation ceased as she neared, both men looking up at her. "Miss Kincaid," Adam said, his face brightening. "Good morning." "Good morning, Deputy. I see you're feeling better." The marshal, a stocky man with a graying mustache, extended his hand. "Marshal Frank Donovan, Miss Kincaid. I understand we have you to thank for helping patch up our deputy here." "I merely assisted Dr. Parker," she replied modestly. "Deputy Grayson did the hard part by staying alive." Adam grinned. "And she's humble too. Don't let her fool you, Marshal. She's as steady under fire as any man I've seen." The marshal nodded approvingly. "Well, the stagecoach passengers arrived safely this morning, all singing your praises. And we've got 3 members of the Blackwood gang locked up thanks to you too." 3. Adam frowned. I only shot 2 of them. The third was caught trying to steal horses from a nearby ranch. Seems he fled after you engaged them. The marshal smiled grimly. Looks like you've broken the back of their operation, Deputy. Adam leaned back against his pillows with satisfaction. Good. Perhaps now the Stagecoach lines will be safer. Indeed. Which brings me to our disagreement, Marshal Donovan said, returning to their interrupted conversation. Deputy Grayson believes he should be released today. Delilah raised an eyebrow. And what does Dr. Parker say? That he should remain here for at least 3 more days, Adam grumbled. But I have duties which can wait until you're healed, Delilah interrupted firmly. You were shot yesterday, Deputy, or have you forgotten that detail? The marshal chuckled. I like her, Grayson. She's got sense. Adam sighed, but his eyes held a hint of amusement as he regarded Delilah. Fine. 1 more day, then I'm leaving, doctor's orders or not. 2, Delilah countered. 1.5, he offered. Marshal Donovan laughed outright. I'll leave you 2 to negotiate. Miss Kincaid, a pleasure to meet you. Fort Laramie School is fortunate to have you. With a tip of his hat, he departed. Once alone, Delilah sat in the chair beside Adam's bed. How are you really feeling? Like I've been kicked by a mule, he admitted. But I've had worse. Somehow that doesn't surprise me. She studied him thoughtfully. Do you make a habit of intercepting stagecoach robberies alone? Only when they contain schoolteachers from Boston, he replied with a smile that made her heart skip. Delilah tried to maintain her composure. Well, this schoolteacher is grateful. Though I am curious, how did you happen to be in exactly the right place yesterday? Adam's expression grew more serious. I've been tracking the Blackwood gang for months. They hit stagecoaches carrying payroll shipments or wealthy passengers. Yesterday's coach was carrying Army payroll in the strongbox, which I'm guessing you didn't know. No, Delilah confirmed, though that explains their determination. I'd been following reports of their movements and guessed they might target that route. I was hoping to catch them before they attacked, but... He shrugged, then winced at the movement. At least we got them in the end. Delilah nodded, suddenly aware of how differently things could have ended without his intervention. I never properly thanked you, she said quietly. For saving my life. Adam's gaze softened. No thanks necessary, Miss Kincaid, though I admit rescuing the new schoolteacher has certain advantages. Oh, and what might those be? For one, the children of Fort Laramie still get their education. His smile turned slightly mischievous. For another, it gives me an excuse to see you again. Delilah felt heat rise to her cheeks. Deputy Grayson, are you flirting with me while confined to a sick bed? Depends, he replied, his blue eyes holding hers. Is it working? Before she could formulate a response, the infirmary door opened, and a middle-aged woman in a fine dress entered. She spotted Delilah and approached with a warm smile. You must be Miss Kincaid. I'm Margaret Collins, the commander's wife. I've been so eager to meet you, though I wish it had been under better circumstances. Delilah stood and greeted the woman politely, aware of Adam's amused gaze. Mrs. Collins continued without pause. I've come to show you to the schoolhouse and your permanent quarters. The school term starts in just 3 days, and I'm sure you'll want time to prepare. We're all so excited to have a proper teacher from the East. That's very kind, Mrs. Collins. I'm eager to see the school. Adam cleared his throat. Don't let me keep you, Miss Kincaid. Duty calls. Delilah turned back to him, suddenly reluctant to leave. I'll come back later to check on you. I'll be here, he replied dryly. Doctor's orders, after all. Mrs. Collins looked between them with interest. Deputy Grayson, I've heard all about your heroics. The entire fort is talking about it. Such bravery. Adam shifted uncomfortably under the praise. Just doing my job, madam. Nonsense, you're a hero, and Miss Kincaid, assisting with surgery after such an ordeal. You two make quite the pair. Delilah felt herself blushing again. We barely know each other, Mrs. Collins. The older woman patted her arm knowingly. Of course, dear. Now come along, there's much to see. With a final glance at Adam, Delilah followed Mrs. Collins from the infirmary. As they walked across the fort's dusty parade ground, the commander's wife kept up a steady stream of information and gossip. The schoolhouse is just lovely. Well, perhaps lovely is generous, but it's sturdy and has new desks. We have about 20 children of various ages. Some are soldiers' children, others belong to civilian workers. The sutler's daughters are absolute angels, but watch out for young Timothy Barrett, mischievous boy, though smart as a whip. Delilah tried to focus on Mrs. Collins' words, but her mind kept returning to the infirmary and the man she'd left there. There was something about Adam Grayson that intrigued her beyond his obvious heroism and good looks. A depth in those blue eyes, perhaps, or the gentle way he'd spoken to her despite his pain. And of course, being unmarried, you'll be expected to maintain the strictest propriety, Mrs. Collins was saying. Though I dare say, after your dramatic arrival, you've already caught the attention of every eligible bachelor in the territory. I'm here to teach, Mrs. Collins, Delilah reminded her firmly, not to find a husband. The older woman smiled knowingly. Of course, dear. That's what they all say at first. But Wyoming Territory has 5 men for every woman. Even a dedicated teacher might find herself swayed by such odds. Delilah chose not to respond to that. Her reasons for coming west were her own, and romance figured nowhere in her plans. Not after what had happened in Boston. The schoolhouse turned out to be a simple one-room building near the eastern wall of the fort. It was indeed sturdy, with new pine desks arranged in rows and a larger desk at the front for the teacher. Bookshelves lined one wall, though they were sparsely filled. We've ordered more books, Mrs. Collins explained, but deliveries are slow. Your quarters are through that door at the back, small but private. The attached living space was indeed small, just a bedroom, sitting area, and tiny kitchen, but it was clean and bright, with curtains at the windows and a small stove for heating. It's perfect, Delilah said sincerely. Far better than I expected. We want our teacher to be comfortable, Mrs. Collins replied. Now, let me show you the rest of the fort, and then we can collect your trunks from the commander's quarters. The remainder of the day passed in a whirlwind of introductions and orientation. By late afternoon, Delilah was established in her new home, her salvaged possessions arranged as best she could manage. She'd met what felt like every resident of Fort Laramie, from the commander to the blacksmith's 3 children who would be her students. Only after dinner did she finally find time to return to the infirmary. The guard, Williams, was awake and grateful for her visit, though still weak from blood loss. Adam, however, was not in his bed. "Where is Deputy Grayson?" she asked Dr. Parker with alarm. The doctor sighed in exasperation. He insisted on moving to the officers' quarters, said he needed to write his report and couldn't do it from a sick. Lieutenant Carson helped him over about an hour ago. But his wound is holding for now, though I told him he's risking reopening it. The doctor shook his head. Stubborn as they come, that one, always has been. Delilah frowned. Always. You've known him long, since he was a boy, Dr. Parker confirmed. His father's ranch was about 20 miles from here. Adam used to ride in with him for supplies. After Senior Grayson died in '65, Adam took over the ranch for a few years before joining the Marshal's service. The war? Delilah asked softly. Dr. Parker nodded. Antietam. Adam was only 16 when the news came, had to grow up fast after that. The information gave Delilah a new perspective on the deputy. She'd sensed a depth to him, a quiet strength that came from facing adversity. "If you're looking to check on him," the doctor added, "officers' quarters are the building with the green door just past the commander's house." Delilah hesitated. It wouldn't be proper for her to visit a man in his quarters, especially not after Mrs. Collins' lecture on the propriety expected of the schoolteacher. "I'll see him tomorrow," she decided reluctantly. "Please tell him I stopped by." Dr. Parker smiled knowingly. "Of course, Miss Kincaid." As she walked back to her small quarters in the fading light, Delilah found herself wondering about Adam Grayson, a 16-year-old boy forced to become a man overnight, a rancher turned lawman, a man who would risk his life for strangers on a stagecoach. A man she couldn't stop thinking about, despite her best intentions. The next morning, Delilah was arranging books on the schoolhouse shelves when a knock at the door interrupted her work. She turned to find Adam Grayson leaning against the doorframe, looking pale but determined, his right arm held carefully against his side. "Deputy," she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "Should you be up and about?" "Probably not," he admitted with a rueful smile. "But I heard you came looking for me yesterday, and I wanted to see how you're settling in." Delilah set down the primer she was holding. "Dr. Parker told me you'd moved to the officers' quarters against medical advice." "I heal better when I'm not being fussed over," he replied, stepping into the schoolhouse and glancing around with interest. "So this is where you'll shape young minds." "That's the plan," she agreed, watching as he examined the sparse bookshelf. "Though we're a bit short on materials." Adam nodded thoughtfully. "I might have some books at my place that could help. Nothing fancy but solid reading." "You live at the fort?" she asked, surprised. "No, I have a small cabin about 3 miles out. I stay at the fort when duty requires it." He turned to face her, his expression softening. "Dr. Parker says you stopped by the infirmary. Were you worried about me, Miss Kincaid?" There was that teasing tone again, and with it, the warmth in his blue eyes that made her pulse quicken. Delilah busied herself with straightening the already straight row of primers. "I was concerned about both patients," she replied evenly. "It's only natural after such an ordeal." Adam approached, moving carefully to avoid jarring his wound. "Of course, very natural." His voice dropped slightly. "I was concerned about you too." Delilah looked up, finding him closer than expected. "Me, I wasn't injured." "No, but you've been through a traumatic experience. Sometimes the effects don't show right away." His gaze was gentle. "Nightmares, startling at loud noises," she hesitated. There had been nightmares, vivid ones where the bandits caught the stagecoach and no heroic deputy appeared to save them. But admitting that felt like revealing too much. "I'm fine, Deputy Grayson. Truly." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded, accepting her answer without pushing further. "Good. And it's still Adam, remember." Before she could respond, footsteps sounded on the schoolhouse steps, and Mrs. Collins appeared in the doorway. Her eyebrows rose at finding the deputy and teacher alone together. "Deputy Grayson, what a surprise to find you here. I thought you'd be confined to bed for days yet." Adam straightened, wincing slightly at the movement. "Just paying my respects to Miss Kincaid, madam. Wanted to make sure she's settling in properly after her harrowing arrival." Mrs. Collins' expression softened. "How thoughtful. Though you really should be resting that wound." "So I've been told," he replied dryly. "I was just leaving." He turned to Delilah. "Miss Kincaid, it's been a pleasure. Perhaps when I'm fully recovered I could show you some of the countryside. The territory has much to offer beyond fort walls." The invitation was delivered casually, but Delilah sensed its significance. She was aware of Mrs. Collins watching them with keen interest. "That would be educational," she replied carefully. "Thank you." Adam's lips quirked in a small smile as if he understood her measured response. With a tip of his hat to both women, he took his leave, moving with deliberate care down the schoolhouse steps. Mrs. Collins waited until he was out of earshot before turning to Delilah with a knowing look. "My dear, I believe our deputy has taken quite an interest in you." "He's merely being kind," Delilah demurred, "after what we experienced together." "Oh, of course," Mrs. Collins agreed, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Still, Adam Grayson is considered quite a catch. His father left him a decent property, and he has a sterling reputation as a lawman. Not to mention those eyes." "Mrs. Collins," Delilah interrupted firmly, "I appreciate your concern, but as I mentioned yesterday, I came to Fort Laramie to teach, not to court." The older woman patted her arm. "And teach you shall. I've just brought the final class roster." She handed over a sheet of paper. 23 students ages 6 to 16. Classes begin Monday. Delilah accepted the list gratefully, both for the information and the change of subject. As Mrs. Collins explained the backgrounds of various students, Delilah found her gaze drifting to the doorway where Adam had stood. Despite her protests to Mrs. Collins, she couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation she'd felt at Adam's invitation. It had been a long time since she'd allowed herself to feel such things, not since Charles and the scandal that had sent her fleeing from Boston. Focusing on the class roster, Delilah silently renewed her commitment to her purpose here. She would be Fort Laramie's teacher, nothing more. Deputy Adam Grayson, with his kind eyes and heroic tendencies, would remain at a proper, professional distance, no matter how her heart might protest. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of preparation. Delilah arranged her classroom, planned lessons, and continued meeting the families of her future students. She saw Adam only once, from a distance across the parade ground, deep in conversation with Marshal Donovan. He'd spotted her and lifted his hand in greeting, but they hadn't spoken. On Monday morning, Delilah stood nervously before her assembled students for the first time. 23 faces looked back at her with varying degrees of interest, skepticism, and curiosity. "Good morning," she began, her voice stronger than she felt. "I am Miss Kincaid, your new teacher. I've come all the way from Boston to help you learn, and I'm very excited to begin our journey together." A small girl in the front row raised her hand immediately. "Miss Kincaid, is it true you were attacked by bandits and Deputy Grayson saved you?" Delilah blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Well, yes, there was an incident with the stagecoach I arrived on. Pa says Deputy Grayson shot 2 outlaws dead," a boy exclaimed from the back row. "Tommy Barrett, you hush that talk right now," an older girl scolded. "That's not proper conversation for school." Delilah cleared her throat. "Actually, no one died in the incident, though there were injuries. And while Deputy Grayson did indeed help us, this is hardly an appropriate topic for our first day of school." She reached for the stack of primers on her desk. "Now, let's begin by assessing where each of you stands in your reading." The morning progressed more smoothly after that, as Delilah evaluated her students' abilities and began organizing them into appropriate learning groups. By noon, when she dismissed them for the midday meal, she felt she had established at least a tentative command of the classroom. As the children filed out, she noticed a figure waiting outside. Adam Grayson stood near the schoolhouse steps, watching the children disperse. He looked better than he had 3 days ago, less pale, standing straighter though still favoring his right side. Several children greeted him enthusiastically as they passed, and he responded with easy familiarity. One small boy stopped to show him something clutched in his hand, a carved wooden horse. Delilah realized, and Adam knelt carefully to admire it, his face lighting with genuine interest. The sight touched something in Delilah's heart. It was clear the children of Fort Laramie adored their deputy, and equally clear that his affection for them was genuine. When the last child had gone, Adam approached the schoolhouse door. He'd shaved and changed into a clean shirt, Delilah noticed, with a deputy's badge once again pinned to his vest. "How was your first morning, Miss Kincaid?" he asked, his smile warm. "Enlightening," she replied. "They're a diverse group with varying levels of education, but eager to learn, I think. They're good children," he agreed. "Even Tommy Barrett, though he's full of tall tales." He hesitated then. "I wondered if you might join me for dinner this evening. The sutler's wife makes an excellent stew on Mondays." Delilah felt a flutter of what? Anticipation. Anxiety. "Is this part of my official welcome to Fort Laramie?" "No," he replied honestly. "This is me asking to spend time with a woman I'd like to know better." His directness caught her off guard. Back in Boston, courtship was conducted through carefully orchestrated social events and chaperoned visits, with intentions hidden behind layers of propriety. Adam's forthright approach was both refreshing and alarming. "Deputy Grayson, Adam," he reminded her gently. "Adam," she conceded. "I'm not sure that would be wise. As the new school teacher, I need to establish a certain reputation in the community." Something like disappointment flickered in his eyes, but he nodded in understanding. "Of course, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't," she assured him quickly. "It's just complicated," he suggested. Delilah smiled ruefully. "Yes." Adam studied her for a moment. "Well, Miss Kincaid, I respect your position, but I should warn you I'm not easily discouraged." His tone was light, but his eyes held a quiet determination that sent a ripple of awareness through her. Before she could respond, the fort's bell rang, signaling the midday meal for the soldiers. "I should let you get to your lunch," Adam said, stepping back. "Congratulations on your first morning as Fort Laramie's teacher." As he turned to leave, Delilah found herself calling after him. "Perhaps another time." He glanced back, a smile spreading across his face. "I'll hold you to that, Miss Kincaid." Watching him walk away, Delilah felt a mixture of relief and regret. She'd come to Wyoming to escape the gossip and scandal that had followed her in Boston, to build a new reputation based solely on her merits as a teacher. Becoming involved with anyone, even someone as honorable as Adam Grayson, risked complicating that fresh start. And yet, as she returned to her classroom to prepare for the afternoon session, she couldn't help but wonder what it might have been like to accept his invitation. The first week of school passed swiftly, each day bringing new challenges and small victories. Delilah found herself settling into a routine, growing more comfortable with her students and her role in the Fort community. On Friday afternoon, as the children filed out after the final bell, Mrs. Collins appeared with a basket over her arm. "Miss Kincaid, I've come to invite you to a small gathering at our home tomorrow evening. Nothing formal, just a few officers and their wives and some of the civilian staff. We thought you might enjoy some adult company after a week with the children." Delilah accepted gratefully. Despite her determination to focus solely on teaching, she had to admit the evenings in her small quarters could be lonely. "That sounds lovely, Mrs. Collins. Thank you." "Wonderful. Oh, and Deputy Grayson will be there too. He's been helping the commander with some security matters for the fort." Mrs. Collins' casual tone didn't quite hide her matchmaking intentions. Delilah chose not to comment on Adam's inclusion in the guest list. "What time should I arrive?" 7 o'clock. "And don't worry about bringing anything, we have plenty." With a cheerful wave, Mrs. Collins departed, leaving Delilah to wonder if she'd just been manipulated into a social encounter with Adam after all. The next evening, Delilah dressed with care in one of her better dresses, a deep blue that complemented her auburn hair. She'd seen little of Adam in the past week, just glimpses across the parade ground or brief encounters as he rode in or out of the fort gates. Each time he'd greeted her politely but hadn't pressed his earlier invitation. The Collins home was the largest private residence in the fort, befitting the commander's status. When Delilah arrived, several guests were already present, gathered in the well-appointed parlor. Mrs. Collins ushered her in with enthusiasm, introducing her to those she hadn't yet met. Adam was standing near the fireplace with the commander and another officer, engaged in what appeared to be serious conversation. He was dressed more formally than Delilah had seen before, in a dark jacket over a crisp white shirt. He looked up as she entered, and though he didn't break from his conversation immediately, his eyes followed her as Mrs. Collins led her around the room. Eventually, she found herself near the refreshment table, accepting a cup of punch from the commander's aide. "Miss Kincaid." She turned to find Adam beside her, his expression warm. Up close, she could see he still moved carefully, but there was more color in his face than there had been a week ago. "Deputy Grayson, you're looking well." "Feeling better every day," he confirmed. "How was your first week of teaching?" "Challenging but rewarding," she replied honestly. "The children are bright, though their education has been somewhat inconsistent, not surprising given the transient nature of fort life." He lowered his voice slightly. "You look beautiful tonight." The compliment, delivered without artifice, brought warmth to her cheeks. "Thank you." He gestured toward an open door leading to a small veranda. "Would you care to step outside for a moment? It's rather warm in here." Delilah hesitated, aware that accepting would mean private conversation, something she'd been avoiding. But Mrs. Collins was deep in conversation across the room, and no one else seemed to be paying them particular attention. "Just for a moment," she agreed. The evening air was cool but pleasant as they stepped onto the veranda. Stars glittered above the fort walls, and the distant howl of a coyote reminded Delilah how far she was from the city streets of Boston. "I've been meaning to ask," Adam said after a moment. "What brought you all the way from Boston to Wyoming Territory?" Teaching positions must be plentiful back east. The question was inevitable, yet Delilah still felt a flutter of anxiety. She'd prepared a suitable answer, of course. "I wanted adventure," she said, which wasn't entirely untrue, "and the opportunity to make a difference. Out here, education isn't taken for granted." Adam studied her in the dim light spilling from the house windows. "All true, I'm sure, but not the whole story, I think." Delilah tensed. "What makes you say that?" "Just a feeling," he replied, his tone gentle rather than accusatory. "The way you sometimes look over your shoulder as if expecting someone to be there. The way you're careful about keeping your distance from everyone, not just me." His perception was unsettling. "You're very observant, Deputy. Part of the job." He leaned against the veranda railing, keeping a respectful distance between them. "I'm not asking you to share your secrets, Miss Kincaid. Everyone's entitled to their privacy. I just want you to know that whatever brought you here, you're safe at Fort Laramie." The simple declaration, "you're safe," touched something deep within Delilah, a place that had been anxious and vigilant since she'd fled Boston. For a moment, she was tempted to tell him everything about Charles, about the scandal, about why she'd traveled so far from home. Instead, she said, "Thank you, that means a great deal." Adam seemed to understand what she wasn't saying. He nodded, then changed the subject. "I've been cleared for full duty starting Monday. Marshal Donovan is sending me to Cheyenne for a few days." "Oh." Delilah was surprised by the pang of disappointment she felt. "Official business," testifying at a trial. "The Blackwood gang members are being transferred there for prosecution." He straightened, turning to face her directly. "But I'll be back by Friday." and I was wondering if you might reconsider my dinner invitation for next Saturday." There it was again, that direct approach that was so different from what she was accustomed to. Delilah found herself admiring his persistence, even as she continued to resist it. "Adam, before you say no," he interrupted gently, "consider that by then I'll have been back on full duty for a week. Your first 2 weeks of teaching will be complete, and having dinner with the deputy who happens to be responsible for security at the fort is hardly scandalous." Put that way, it was difficult to formulate a reasonable objection, and if she were honest with herself, Delilah wanted to accept. "Very well," she said finally. "Saturday dinner." The smile that spread across his face made her heart beat faster. "I'll pick you up at 6, and Delilah." The use of her given name sent a small thrill through her. "Thank you for the second chance." Before she could respond, the veranda door opened wider, and Mrs. Collins appeared. "There you two are. Colonel Thornton is about to propose a toast to our new schoolteacher." As they followed her back inside, Delilah was acutely aware of Adam's presence beside her. She just agreed to what was undeniably a social engagement with him, a step beyond the professional courtesy that had marked their interactions thus far. It was a small step, perhaps. But as Colonel Thornton raised his glass to welcome Miss Delilah Kincaid, who has already shown remarkable courage and dedication to our community, she couldn't help but feel it was significant. Adam's eyes met hers across the room as glasses were raised in her honor. There was something in his gaze, admiration, certainly, but also a quiet patience that suggested he understood this would be a gradual process. For the first time since arriving at Fort Laramie, Delilah allowed herself to consider the possibility that her fresh start might include more than just teaching. The week that followed was busy enough to keep Delilah from dwelling too much on her upcoming dinner with Adam. With him away in Cheyenne, the fort seemed oddly quieter, though life continued its regular rhythm. Her students were beginning to respond to her consistent teaching methods, and she found genuine satisfaction in their progress. By Friday afternoon, however, Delilah found herself watching the fort gates with more frequency than she cared to admit. Adam had said he'd return by Friday, but as the sun began to set with no sign of him, she told herself she wasn't disappointed, merely concerned for his safety. Saturday morning brought clear skies and a cool breeze. Delilah was sweeping the schoolhouse steps when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Adam riding through the fort gates, his hat pulled low against the morning sun. He looked tired but intact, his posture straight in the saddle despite what must have been a long ride. Their eyes met across the parade ground, and he lifted a hand in greeting. Delilah returned the gesture, then quickly returned to her sweeping, aware of Mrs. Barrett watching curiously from nearby. Later that afternoon, as Delilah was preparing for their dinner, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find a young soldier holding a small package. "Delivery for you, Miss Kincaid, from Deputy Grayson." Intrigued, Delilah accepted the package and thanked the messenger. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, was a book, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. A note was tucked inside the cover. "Miss Kincaid, I remembered you mentioning your bookshelf was sparse. This belonged to my mother. I thought you might enjoy it, or perhaps your students would benefit from it someday. I look forward to our dinner this evening. Yours, Adam." Delilah ran her fingers over the book's worn leather cover. It was a thoughtful gift, personal without being presumptuous. The fact that it had belonged to his mother gave it special significance, suggesting he trusted her with something he valued. At precisely 6 o'clock, another knock sounded. When Delilah opened the door, Adam stood there in his best clothes, freshly shaved, his hat in his hands. The sight of him tall and handsome in the evening light made her momentarily forget the careful speech she'd prepared about maintaining professional boundaries. "Good evening, Delilah," he said, his voice warm. "Good evening, Adam." She reached for her shawl. "Thank you for the book. It was very thoughtful." "You're welcome." "My mother loved Jane Austen, said she understood the complexity of people better than most." He offered his arm. "Shall we? I've made arrangements at the officers' mess. It's not exactly a fine Boston restaurant, but the cook has promised his best effort tonight." As they walked across the fort, Delilah was acutely aware of the curious glances they received. By morning, everyone would know that the new schoolteacher had dined with Deputy Grayson. She found, somewhat to her surprise, that the prospect didn't trouble her as much as it once might have. The officers' mess had been transformed for the evening. A small table had been set apart from the others, with a cloth and candles, an attempt at creating a more intimate setting within the utilitarian space. The cook, clearly taking his task seriously, had prepared a meal several steps above the usual fort fare. As they settled at the table, Adam said, "I hope this meets with your approval. Our options are limited at the fort." "It's lovely," Delilah assured him sincerely. "Much nicer than I expected." Conversation flowed easily as they ate. Adam told her about Cheyenne and the Blackwood gang's trial, while Delilah shared stories from her classroom. She found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawn in by Adam's understated humor and genuine interest in her experiences. "How did you come to be a teacher?" he asked as they finished their meal. "Was it always your ambition?" Delilah considered how to answer truthfully without revealing too much. "Not always. My father wanted me to follow him into medicine, but I found I preferred books to anatomy. Teaching seemed a natural path." Adam nodded thoughtfully. "Your father must be proud." "He died last year," she said quietly. "Influenza." "I'm sorry." His expression held genuine sympathy. "Were you close?" "Yes and no. He was a demanding man driven by his profession. After my mother died when I was 12, he became more focused on his practice, less present at home." She paused, surprised by her willingness to share this much. "But he ensured I received an excellent education, which I'm grateful for." Adam seemed to sense her discomfort with the personal nature of the conversation. "Well, Fort Laramie's children are certainly benefiting from that education now. Mrs. Collins tells me Tommy Barrett actually sat still for an entire lesson yesterday, a minor miracle, according to his mother." Delilah smiled, grateful for the shift. "He's bright but restless. I've found if I give him extra responsibilities, he's less likely to disrupt the class." As the evening continued, Delilah found herself relaxing more fully in Adam's company. He was easy to talk to, never pressing when she deflected personal questions, sharing his own experiences with a candor that invited trust. When they finally left the officers' mess, the fort was quiet, most residents already retired for the night. Adam walked her back to her quarters, their pace unhurried. "Thank you for tonight," he said as they reached her door. "I've been looking forward to it all week." "So have I," Delilah admitted, surprising herself with the confession. Adam's expression softened. In the moonlight, his blue eyes seemed deeper, more intense. "May I call on you again?" The proper response would be to suggest something chaperoned, something public. Instead, Delilah heard herself say, "I'd like that." He smiled, then slowly, giving her every chance to step away, he reached for her hand. His touch was warm, his calloused fingers gentle as they closed around hers. "Good night, Delilah." "Good night, Adam." He released her hand and stepped back, waiting as she entered her quarters. Only after she closed the door did Delilah realize she was smiling, her heart beating a little faster than usual. It was just dinner, she told herself. a friendly meal between colleagues. But as she prepared for bed, the memory of Adam's hand holding hers lingered, and she wondered if she was being honest with herself about what was happening between them. Over the following weeks, Adam and Delilah settled into a cautious but increasingly comfortable pattern. He called on her regularly, sometimes for dinner, other times for walks around the fort or rides into the surrounding countryside. Always proper, always respectful, yet with an undercurrent of growing affection that neither of them acknowledged directly. October arrived with crisp mornings and golden afternoons. Delilah's students were making steady progress, and she found genuine satisfaction in her work. The fort community had accepted her completely, no longer viewing her as an Eastern novelty, but as their teacher and friend. On a particularly beautiful Saturday, Adam suggested a ride to a nearby lake. "It's about 5 miles from the fort," he explained. "Perfect this time of year. The cottonwoods are turning gold, and the water's still warm enough to paddle if you're so inclined." Delilah agreed readily. After weeks in the schoolroom, the prospect of an afternoon outdoors was appealing. Mrs. Collins, ever the chaperone, had initially frowned at the idea of them riding out alone, but her husband had intervened. "Deputy Grayson is the most honorable man I know," Colonel Collins had declared. "And Miss Kincaid is a grown woman, not some giddy schoolgirl. Let them enjoy the fine weather." So it was that Delilah found herself riding beside Adam along a well-worn trail, the October sun warm on her back. She'd become a more confident rider since arriving at Fort Laramie, no longer clinging nervously to the saddle as she had during their first desperate journey together. "You look at home on horseback now," Adam observed as they rode side by side. "A far cry from that first day." "Well, that first day I was sandwiched between you and an unconscious man after being shot at by bandits," she reminded him with a smile. "Hardly ideal circumstances for developing good riding form." Adam laughed, the sound warming her more than the sunshine. "Fair point. Though I can't say I regret how it brought us together." Delilah glanced at him, struck again by how handsome he was with the sunlight glinting on his dark hair, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. Over the past weeks, she'd learned more about him: his childhood on his father's ranch, his brief time at school in St. Louis, his decision to become a lawman after tracking down rustlers who'd stolen his cattle. "I don't regret it either," she admitted quietly. "Though I could have done without the bullets." They reached the lake just before noon. It was as beautiful as Adam had described: a clear blue oval nestled among hills, surrounded by cottonwoods whose leaves had indeed turned a brilliant gold. A small sandy beach curved along one side, perfect for their picnic. After securing the horses, Adam spread a blanket on the sand and unpacked the food Mrs. Collins' cook had prepared for them: cold chicken, bread, apples, and a jar of lemonade. As they ate, Delilah found herself more relaxed than she'd been in months, perhaps years. "Tell me more about Boston," Adam said as they finished their meal. "Do you miss it?" Delilah considered the question carefully. "I miss certain things: the libraries, the bookshops, concerts at the music hall." She looked out across the lake, its surface rippling gently in the breeze. "But I don't miss the constraints of society there, the constant feeling of being watched and judged." Adam nodded thoughtfully. "The territory has its own constraints, but they're different. People judge you more by what you do than by your family name or how you pour tea." "Exactly," Delilah agreed, relieved that he understood. "Here, I'm evaluated on my merits as a teacher, not on whether I've maintained the proper social connections or adhered to every societal rule." "Is that why you left?" Adam asked, his tone gentle but direct. The constraints of Boston society. The question touched too close to the truth she'd been avoiding. Delilah felt her shoulders tense. "Partly," she said carefully. Adam was quiet for a moment, then said, "You don't have to tell me, Delilah. But I hope you know you can trust me with your past, whatever it might contain." There was such sincerity in his voice, such openness in his expression, that Delilah found herself wavering. Over the past weeks, her feelings for Adam had deepened beyond what she'd allowed herself to acknowledge. Perhaps it was time to trust him with the truth. "There was a man," she began, her voice low. "Charles Winthrop, from one of Boston's oldest families. He was a medical student under my father's mentorship." Adam remained silent, his eyes on her face, giving her space to continue at her own pace. "We became close. My father approved the Winthrops were well connected and Charles was brilliant. Everyone expected us to marry." Delilah paused, the familiar ache of betrayal rising in her chest. "But then I discovered he was also pursuing a relationship with Amelia Hartford, daughter of the hospital's chief benefactor." "He was courting two women at once," Adam said, his expression darkening. Delilah nodded. "When I confronted him, he claimed it was merely strategic, that he needed the Hartford connection for his career, but it was me he truly cared for. He suggested we could continue our relationship privately while he cultivated the Hartford's favor." "The cad," Adam muttered. "Indeed." "I refused, of course, and ended our courtship immediately. But Charles—" She took a deep breath. "He became vindictive, claimed I had pursued him inappropriately, that I had compromised my virtue to try to secure his affections." Adam's jaw tightened. "And people believed him over you." "He was very convincing, and the Winthrops were more influential than my father, despite his respected position." Delilah stared out at the lake, the memories still painful despite the months that had passed. "Soon there were whispers wherever I went. Former friends avoided me. Teaching positions at reputable schools suddenly became unavailable." "So you came west," Adam concluded quietly. "So I came west," she confirmed, "where no one had heard of Charles Winthrop or the scandal he created, where I could be judged on my own merits." Adam was quiet for a long moment. When Delilah finally gathered the courage to look at him directly, she found not judgment or disgust, but a steady, warm gaze that held nothing but understanding. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said simply. "You're not disappointed to learn about my scandalous past?" She tried to keep her tone light, but the question was sincere. Adam shook his head firmly. "The only scandal was how poorly you were treated. This Charles was a dishonorable man who lied to protect himself at your expense." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but reassuring. "Your integrity in refusing his proposal speaks to your character, not his." Relief washed through Delilah, followed by a surge of emotion so strong it brought tears to her eyes. She'd carried the weight of Charles's betrayal and the subsequent scandal for so long, fearing that anyone who learned the truth would view her differently. "I was afraid to tell you," she admitted. "Afraid it would change how you see me." Adam's fingers tightened around hers. "It does change how I see you," he said quietly. "It makes me admire your courage even more." The simple statement, delivered with such evident sincerity, broke through the last of Delilah's carefully constructed defenses. A tear slipped down her cheek despite her efforts to contain it. Without hesitation, Adam reached up and gently brushed it away, his calloused thumb soft against her skin. "No more tears for men who don't deserve them," he murmured. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them. Delilah was acutely aware of his nearness, of the warmth of his hand still cradling her face. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Adam leaned forward. His lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it was almost reverent. Delilah's eyes fluttered closed as she surrendered to the moment, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs. The kiss lasted only seconds, but when Adam pulled back, Delilah felt as though something fundamental had changed not just between them, but within herself. The wariness she'd carried since Boston, the fear of being vulnerable again, seemed to have loosened its grip. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Adam confessed, his voice slightly rough. "Since that first day in the infirmary, if I'm being honest." Delilah smiled, feeling suddenly, inexplicably light. "Even while bleeding from a gunshot wound, even then," he grinned. "Though I'll admit the timing wasn't ideal." They both laughed, the tension of the moment dissolving into something warm and comfortable. As the afternoon continued, they walked along the lakeshore, talking more openly than ever before. Delilah found herself sharing stories from her childhood, memories of her mother, hopes for her future, things she'd kept carefully guarded until now. Adam, too, seemed more forthcoming, describing the ranch he still maintained outside of town, his ambitions to expand it someday, his complicated feelings about balancing his duty as a lawman with his desire for a more settled life. "You ever think of giving up the badge?" Delilah asked as they made their way back to the picnic blanket. Adam considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, especially after days like the one when we met, when the dangers of the job become all too real." He glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "More so recently, if I'm being honest." "Because of your injury? Because I've found someone that makes me consider a future beyond just enforcing the law." The honesty in his voice made Delilah's heart flutter. "But for now, it's what I'm good at, what the territory needs." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they reluctantly packed up their picnic and mounted their horses for the ride back to Fort Laramie. They rode closer together than they had on the outward journey, occasionally letting their hands meet when the trail was wide enough for side-by-side travel. "Delilah," Adam said as the fort came into view in the distance, "I hope you know that what happened today, what you shared with me, what happened between us, it matters to me. You matter to me." The simple declaration, spoken with such evident sincerity, warmed Delilah more than the afternoon sun had done. "You matter to me too, Adam," she replied softly. "More than I expected, more than I was prepared for." His smile in response was brilliant enough to rival the sunset. "Then I'd say this was a perfect day, wouldn't you?" As they rode through the fort gates, greeted by the sentry's knowing smile, Delilah had to agree. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming territory, perhaps for the first time in years, she felt not just safe, but truly hopeful about what the future might hold. November brought colder weather and the first dustings of snow to Fort Laramie. Delilah's school continued to thrive, with even the most reluctant students showing improvement. Her relationship with Adam had deepened steadily since that day at the lake, though they maintained appropriate discretion in public. On Thanksgiving Day, the fort held a community celebration in the mess hall. Tables were arranged in long rows, decorated with pine boughs and candles. Everyone contributed what they could. The officers' wives prepared traditional dishes. The sutler donated extra supplies, and even the children helped by creating decorations from colored paper and pine cones. Delilah, seated between Adam and Mrs. Collins, looked around at the gathered faces, her students, their families, the soldiers and civilians who had become her community. 6 months ago, she'd been fleeing Boston in disgrace. Now she was here, respected and, more importantly, happy. "Penny, for your thoughts," Adam murmured as plates were passed and conversations flowed around them. "I was just thinking how different my life is now compared to last Thanksgiving," she replied. "How much has changed in such a short time. For the better, I hope." There was a hint of vulnerability in his question. Delilah met his gaze warmly. Very much for the better. After the meal, Colonel Collins stood to offer a toast. To our community, he said, raising his glass. To those who protect us, those who heal us, those who teach our children, and those who keep us fed and supplied. Together, we make Fort Laramie not just an outpost, but a home. Glasses were raised all around as voices echoed, to Fort Laramie. Later, as the celebration wound down and people began drifting back to their quarters, Adam asked Delilah to take a short walk with him. Despite the cold, she readily agreed, wrapping her woolen shawl more tightly around her shoulders. They strolled along the parade ground, their breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. Snow was falling gently, dusting Adam's hat and shoulders with white flakes. Beautiful evening, Delilah observed, admiring how the fort looked almost magical in the soft snowfall. Beautiful company, Adam replied, his smile visible even in the gathering darkness. He guided her toward a quieter corner of the fort, near the eastern wall where few people ventured after dark. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his coat pocket. An early Christmas gift, you might say. He withdrew a small box and held it out to her. Delilah accepted it with curiosity, her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a scrap of soft fabric, was a ring, a simple band of gold with a small, perfect pearl set in its center. Adam, she breathed, looking up at him in surprise. It was my mother's, he explained, his voice low and earnest. My father gave it to her when he asked her to marry him. Now I'm asking you. He took the box gently from her hands and removed the ring, then knelt before her in the fresh snow. Delilah Kincaid, these past months have been the happiest of my life. From that first day, when you were brave enough to help me despite being terrified yourself, I've known you were special. Getting to know you, your strength, your kindness, your determination has only confirmed what my heart suspected from the beginning. He held the ring up, the pearl gleaming softly in the lantern light from a nearby building. I love you, Delilah. I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me? Delilah felt tears welling in her eyes, but unlike the tears she'd shed over Charles, these were born of joy. In coming west, she'd hoped to escape a painful past, never imagining she might find a future more perfect than any she'd dared to dream. Yes, she whispered, then more strongly. Yes, Adam, I love you too. His face lit with such happiness that it nearly took her breath away. Rising to his feet, Adam slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her all along. My wife, the schoolteacher, he said, drawing her into his arms. Fort Laramie will have the best educated children in the territory. Delilah laughed softly. And the best protected, with the deputy as their stepfather. Adam's expression grew more serious. About that, I've been thinking. The ranch needs more attention than I can give it while wearing the badge. After the new year, I'm considering resigning my position to focus on ranching full-time. Because of me? Delilah asked, concerned that she might be the reason he'd give up work he valued. Because of us, he corrected gently. Because I want a life where I come home to you every night, not just when duty allows, where we can build something lasting together. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I've spoken with Marshal Donovan already. He understands. Delilah considered this news. The ranch Adam had mentioned was about 5 miles from the fort, not so far that she couldn't continue teaching, at least until they had children of their own. If that's what you want, I support you completely, she said. Though I admit, I've grown rather fond of your badge. Adam laughed, then leaned down to kiss her, a deeper, more passionate kiss than the gentle one they'd shared at the lake. When they finally parted, both were breathing faster, their faces flushed with more than just the cold. We should tell the Collins first, Delilah said, practical even in her happiness. They've been so kind to us both. Agreed, though I suspect Mrs. Collins will claim credit for the match. Adam's eyes twinkled. She's been dropping hints since your first week here. That obvious were we. I was, Adam admitted with a rueful smile. I'm told I watched you like a hawk watches a prairie dog when you first arrived. Delilah laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. Well, Deputy Grayson, your surveillance has paid off. You've captured your quarry. Indeed I have, he murmured, drawing her close again. And I intend to treasure her for the rest of my days. As snow continued to fall gently around them, Delilah and Adam stood wrapped in each other's arms. The pearl ring glinting on her finger, a promise of a future neither had expected to find when a stagecoach robbery brought them together on a dusty Wyoming trail. Delilah and Adam were married on Christmas Eve in the fort's small chapel, decorated with pine boughs and candles for the occasion. Colonel Collins gave the bride away, and Mrs. Collins wept openly throughout the ceremony. Delilah wore a new dress of deep green velvet, ordered specially from Cheyenne, with her mother's lace veil, one of the few family heirlooms she'd brought from Boston. Adam, standing tall and handsome at the altar in a new black suit, watched with undisguised awe as his bride walked toward him. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered as she reached his side. "Even more beautiful than the Wyoming sunset," she teased, remembering his frequent praise for the territory's natural wonders. "Far more beautiful," he confirmed, taking her hand in his. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, spoken clearly before the gathered community, soldiers, civilians, and students alike. When the chaplain pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up nearly raised the chapel roof. The reception was held in the decorated mess hall, with music provided by soldiers who played fiddle and guitar. Adam led Delilah in their first dance as husband and wife, moving with surprising grace for a man more accustomed to the saddle than the dance floor. "Where did you learn to dance?" Delilah asked as he guided her through a waltz. "My mother insisted," he admitted. "Said no son of hers would grow up unable to properly escort a lady at a social function." His expression softened with memory. "She would have loved you, Delilah, almost as much as I do." Later, as they prepared to leave for the ranch where they would begin their married life, Tommy Barrett approached with a carefully wrapped package. "It's from all of us students, Miss Kincaid, Mrs. Grayson," he said, unusually shy. Inside was a handmade quilt, each square contributed by a different student, with their names embroidered beneath simple designs representing aspects of life at Fort Laramie. In the center was a carefully stitched stagecoach, surrounded by a heart. "Because that's how you came to us," explained Sally Collins, the commander's daughter. "On the stagecoach that got robbed, and then Deputy Grayson saved you and fell in love with you." Delilah felt tears threatening again. She seemed to cry more easily these days, but always from happiness. "It's perfect," she told her students, hugging each one in turn. "I'll treasure it always." As they rode away from the fort in Adam's wagon, warm buffalo robes tucked around them against the winter chill, Delilah leaned against her husband's shoulder. "I never expected this," she confessed. "When I left Boston, I thought I was leaving everything behind, any chance at love, at family." Adam's arm tightened around her. "And I never expected a stagecoach robbery to bring me the woman I'd love for the rest of my life." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected beginnings." The ranch house welcomed them with glowing windows, a fire already laid in the hearth by Adam's ranch hand who had prepared the place for their arrival. It was a modest home, but solid and well built, with room to grow. Adam carried Delilah across the threshold, setting her gently on her feet in what was now their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Grayson," he said softly. "Home," Delilah repeated, savoring the word. After months of living in temporary quarters, first in Boston and then at the fort, the concept of a permanent home, their home, filled her with contentment. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other fully for the first time. Adam was gentle, patient, his love for her evident in every touch, every whispered endearment. Delilah, who had once feared she might never trust a man again after Charles's betrayal, found herself surrendering completely to the safety of Adam's embrace. "I love you," he murmured as they lay entwined in the darkness afterward, "more than I have words to express." "Show me again," she whispered, drawing him closer. "We have all night." In the years that followed, Delilah continued teaching at Fort Laramie, riding to and from the ranch each day when weather permitted. Adam, true to his word, resigned his deputy position after the new year, focusing his energies on expanding the ranch and building their future. Their first child, a son they named David, after Delilah's father arrived the following November, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Margaret, named for Adam's mother. As their family grew, so did the ranch, becoming one of the most prosperous in the territory. Delilah eventually retired from teaching when their third child was born, though she continued to tutor students who showed particular promise. She also established a small library on the ranch, open to anyone who wished to borrow books, and wrote regular letters to her former students who had moved away, maintaining the connections she'd formed. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Adam surprised her with a trip back to the lake where they'd shared their first kiss. It was December now, not October, and the lake was rimmed with ice, the cottonwoods bare against the winter sky. But it was still beautiful in its own way, just as their love had evolved from the first bloom of attraction to something deeper, richer, and more enduring. "Any regrets?" Adam asked as they stood hand in hand on the shore, their children playing nearby under the watchful eye of Adam's trusted foreman who had accompanied them. Delilah considered the question seriously. "Only that I didn't come west sooner," she said finally. "Think of all the time we could have had together." Adam smiled, lines crinkling at the corners of his eyes, lines earned from squinting into the sun, from laughter, from life. "We have now," he reminded her, "and all the days to come." As they rode home that evening, their children drowsy in the wagon bed behind them, Delilah thought about how a moment of terror, the stagecoach robbery that had once seemed like the worst possible beginning to her new life, had led her to this perfect happiness. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Adam asked, echoing the question he'd asked her so many times over the years. "I was just thinking that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best ones," she replied, watching as the ranch house came into view, lamplight glowing in the windows. "If not for those bandits, we might never have met." "Oh, I don't know about that," Adam mused. "I like to think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be." As they approached their home, their children waking at the familiar sounds of the ranch, Delilah found herself agreeing with her husband. Some things were indeed meant to be, like a Boston schoolteacher and a Wyoming deputy finding love in the aftermath of danger, building a life stronger and more beautiful than either could have imagined alone. And as the years continued to pass, as their children grew and the territory became a state, as the world around them changed with new technologies and ideas, one thing remained constant: the love that had begun that day when they tried to rob the stagecoach she rode, and the cowboy shot twice and rode her to safety.